it's really not a stretch to say I think this is the biggest development for Al-Qaeda since 9/11. After years of relentless counterterrorism pressure, Al-Qaeda central leadership has been in a desperate state. Ayman al-Zawahiri is either sick, dead, or in hiding, and an array of senior leaders have been killed in recent years. But now, with a Taliban victory in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda has the breathing space in which they can potentially recover and rebuild for the first time, I think, in 20 years. And they have found and recovered their most prized safe haven in Afghanistan in which to do that. Worse still, of course, the United States has effectively dissolved most, if not all, of our intelligence infrastructure in Afghanistan, which means facing down a potentially recovering Al-Qaeda, we will be doing that blind. So given how much we've achieved over the last several years, this debacle really is a remarkable misstep. So Al-Qaeda has a religiously binding, irreversible oath of allegiance to the Taliban. That is a relationship that dates back decades, a relationship that has been built upon by decades of interaction, familial ties, intermarriage, operational cooperation. The idea that an empowered Taliban was going to turn against Al-Qaeda, their longest and oldest ally, was an absurd proposition from day one. Now, having said that, does that mean that the Taliban is the same as Al-Qaeda? No, they are different. But Al-Qaeda will undoubtedly now find at least regions of Afghanistan controlled by sympathetic Taliban commanders, in which they will undoubtedly be able to recover, rebuild, and establish at least localized safe havens in which to operate more effectively again. And again, with no real intelligence on the ground and with no real meaningful overflight access, we will be in a almost blind status in terms of being able to follow, deter, and to neutralize that recovery. For me, this is just as significant and worrying from a counterterrorism standpoint as Al-Qaeda's impending recovery. In recent years, probably the most visible trend we've seen in Salafi jihadist terrorism has been the localism or the localization of jihadist activity. Now, for many groups pursuing localized agendas, the Taliban has been the archetypal example of how best to implement that strategy. So to see the Taliban victorious, and not just victorious against the Afghan government, but against the United States, the great Satan, is of enormous significance for the global jihadist community. And what's worse, in the last 24 hours alone, we've seen major governments announce their intention to establish ties with the Taliban. So we're now seeing the Taliban legitimized, given the same level of respect as ordinary governments elsewhere in the world. So what I'm worried about most is the mainstreaming of this local jihad approach. And to me, that might not necessarily bring a threat to the US homeland tomorrow, but it certainly could several years down the line if these safe havens continue to grow in the way we've seen in recent years.